Hey y'all, welcome to Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. I'm Mandy. I'm just a mom sitting down with real parents, having real conversations about what's going on in our schools. Today, I'm joined by John Petree, the CEO of Texans for Excellence in Education, the alternative to TASB. John, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Mandy. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I'm so excited to have a father of 9.
Father of 9 kids. This is the hazard of marrying a social worker. My wife works in, lots of children's issues across the state. And so, long story short, we have 3 biological kiddos, 6 adopted kiddos. 5 are out of the house and mainly off the payroll. We've still got 4 at home. The light's at the end of the tunnel, though. It's been a pleasure to raise them.
Well, God bless you for standing up and giving all of your children a home that shares the values of most Texans and raising them to love Texas and America.
Absolutely.
That is obviously the most important job. But second to that, your job that brings an income to support those mostly kids in the house, a few that are out and still on a little bit of payroll, is running Texas for Excellence in Education. So tell us a little bit about that and how and why you got started.
Absolutely. Well, just to give a little bit of context about myself, I'm a 30-year veteran of K-12 education. I've been a teacher, principal, central office. I've worked at 2 different education service centers. I've consulted in the private sector for education issues and projects, and managed a lot of big projects for the state. When this opportunity came up, knocked on my door, right out a year ago, I couldn't think of a better opportunity to kind of spend the last quarter of my career to really start thinking about not only the challenges that we are facing as a state, as a nation, and the ideology, quite honestly, that's just being crammed down our throats as parents, as taxpayers, to really do something significant at that ideological level to start shifting mindset, to start shifting thought patterns around, we don't have to do it this way, because we're headed to a crash course of just a head-on collision on so many pertinent issues. And I thought, this is the legacy I want to leave, is how can we set right this course? How can we implement at the policy level things that are going to help ensure the success of our kiddos, of our teachers for years to come?
That's amazing. So when you were approached and you said this is a great opportunity, what was the opportunity? We know that you're the CEO, but really, what was the mission of TEE?
So the mission, and we make no bones about it, in early, I believe it was somewhere around 21, there was a letter sent by many of our state house leaders out to every single school board trustee in the state, urging them to leave TASB.
Okay. And
the crux of that motivation was TASB's refusal to uphold Texas values in their policy. That, there were lots of hot button issues during that time period. And
wasn't that when we were domestic terrorists?
Oh, we were domestic terrorists. That was the dawn of all types of gender issues. And TASB approached each and every one of those issues from the absolute most liberal approach you could take as a policy issuing organization. And when these patriotic legislators saw this, they just knew we needed to be doing something different. This is, we've got to do something different. Leave TASB. That's a great concept. Where do we go?
Right.
And because quite honestly, they've had a 70-year monopoly of running all policy in the state of Texas. They've been unchecked in their, in their operations and how they have guided and created a kingdom for themselves that honestly don't protect school board trustees. They protect themselves and they protect administrators. With the guidance, with the issuance and guidance of their policy.
Right. And like you said, there's a lot of the policy guidance, because that's what they do, right? They have something called board book.
Correct.
And that is kind of their Bible for trustees, that they say, this is how you must do things.
Correct.
And then is it true that a lot of times they'll say, if you don't do it this way, then you're likely to be sued? particularly by entities, far left-leaning entities like the ACLU and things like that.
Absolutely. There's a lot of fear mongering
Mhm.
in policy and threat of lawsuit or scrutiny or public, public opinion and those
Mhm.
kind of things. Hey,
Mhm.
you have to do it this way or else.
Yep.
Something that I want to highlight that I think is a big misconception with TASB and the policy that they issue. And this is a common misconception, I'll say, with probably the majority of school board trustees and school superintendents and administrators.
Okay.
In school policy, there's basically two factions. There's what TASB deems as local policy and legal policy. Local is what you have adopted locally. You've
Mhm.
crafted that. You've worked with attorneys. It's representing your local values and such.
Okay.
Legal, and these are things that are trained actually in universities. Legal is presented to be the law.
Right.
It's not. It's absolutely not the law.
Say that again.
It is a TASB attorney's interpretation and opinion of the law.
Okay.
It is not the law.
Okay.
So you have, and that's a big mindset shift, because even as a young administrator, I would look at that legal and go, oh my goodness, this is the law. I have to absolutely do this, or
Right.
I'm going to be, non-compliant and put my district at liability.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize I was just relying on some attorney down in Austin interpreting the law and writing their best interpretation.
Yep.
It's not the law.
That's right. I hear that all the time. I get trustees that call and they say, oh, we just got this. Is this right? Is this the law? And obviously we're blessed at the Texas Public Policy Foundation to have many
Right.
attorneys on staff and have access and be able to kind of do, to, in theory, counter a lot of times what is very leftist personal opinions.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay. I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood kind of. So this was the impetus for starting and getting going and really saying, wait a second, this group that's kind of had a monopoly and has shifted far to the left, they're not providing you, quote, law. They are providing you guidance of how they interpret the law.
Absolutely.
Okay. Keep going.
So a little bit more context about a trustee policy organization. They provide a lot of services.
Mm-hmm.
That's no big secret. And we need to understand that just walking away from a school policy organization, it's a big step.
Yeah.
Because they provide a lot of backbone and infrastructure for a school district.
And they might sue you.
Crazy enough, some of our flagship districts that came on with T very early, in the game, they were threatened with lawsuit from
I
TASB
heard about that.
to if they leave us, or if they take the policy that they developed and paid for, and have cited that was going to be not acceptable.
So there was a public letter that, several of them put this out and said, wait a second, just to clarify for everybody, when several amazing trustees, school boards that really realized this is insanity coming out of this group, this association that is 100%, roughly 100% funded by taxpayers to give guidance.
Correct.
That taxpayers paid for service and guidance, and that was rendered. School boards adopted and worked, as you said, to make it their own. So there was that exchange. And then when they'd said, we don't want to be a part of this anymore. We don't want to be a part of your club. We're not on your team. This is crazy. No, we're not going to engage in that progressive ideology here in our district. And they were threatened with a lawsuit because the TASB legal entity was claiming everything that you've got in your district is ours.
Well, you're exactly right. And these are not, these aren't things that we took off their shelf. These are items that were paid for,
right?
That were adopted by boards in open, legally called meetings. It's not like we're sneaking things out the back door. These are very public interactions and payments for services,
right?
That
Lots of
occurred
payments.
over lots and lots of payments. So, that's that. We knew we were ruffling feathers,
Sure.
when that was the first rattle out of the box is, we're going to sue you if you
You're
try
over
to
the
lose
target
us.
then.
Yeah. You know that you have definitely opened a Pandora's box when the first rattle out of the box is, you leave us, we sue you.
That's wild. Okay. So that threat was made publicly. Yes. Okay. The threat was made publicly, but again, very strong, courageous trustees, Texans, parents said, bring it.
Yes. And, we definitely had a core group of districts that led the way.
Yep.
That, and some were more aggressive than others.
Okay.
Some were, we will be out of TASB in the next 60 days.
Yep.
That's a crazy timeline. I'm just going to go on the
Yes,
record and say
no.
that's a crazy timeline, but we did it. That tells you about the remarkable spirit of T.
That's awesome.
The team rose to the occasion, rapidly developed the necessary products. As I said earlier, there are so many services. You rely on those agencies for HR services, for compensation studies, for insurance and online policy hosting. All these things
They're
that you're
doing
dependent on.
Healthcare insurance?
It's
Healthcare
I
cooperative?
I call it all the non-glamorous insurance.
Okay.
It's things like your workman's comp, your property, casualty, professional liability, all of
Risk
those kind of
management.
things.
Yeah. Okay.
Basically everything that would fall under the risk management umbrella. So we, and those were my first tasks coming on was,
how do we deal with this?
These districts are coming on full on, and we've got to get these products developed. We've got to get them implemented in rapid fashion. And that's how I spent my first 6 months on board, was just solidifying those products, getting them to market, and honestly, getting them to a much higher quality of product and customer service. One thing that we hear loud and clear is it's not just the product, it's the terrible customer service we receive, and you hate to say it, but the smaller the district you are, the less attention you get from large statewide organizations.
Right.
Our philosophy is exactly the opposite. Kiddos in small rural West Texas are just as important as the kiddos that are sitting in Houston ISD.
Yes.
Every one of those student seats are important, and we see every one of those as important. We don't care if your enrollment is 130 kids or if it's 5 million.
Yeah.
That's a Texas child there. Those are Texas school teachers, and that's who we look after.
I love that. And so you talked about the customer service. What about the price?
Pricing, we are definitely under what trustees pay for their TASB services. Just to give you some rough estimates right off the top, our membership fee just to join the organization is exactly 50% of TASB's. So it's a 50% off, first rattle out of the box.
Taxpayers save 50% just on the initial investment.
Correct. It's there's an annual membership involved with both organizations. Ours is exactly 50 off. The other products are, I don't have one product that is at this point that is more than a TASB product. They vary at differing levels of discount.
Yep.
But we are a very taxpayer conscious organization. We're not sitting in a high-rise building in Austin, paying hundreds of thousands of dollars a month in rental and lease fees. We make no apologies about it. We're a virtual remote company. It's 2024. There are no reasons we need to incur all of those expenses that, quite honestly, keep money out of the classrooms.
Yep.
We want to keep our prices affordable and efficient because we believe that money belongs most efficiently back in the classroom, giving teachers what they need to be able to teach the kids in front of them. That's
amazing. That's fantastic. So let's talk about some policy differences. So we've kind of given the broad overview, but when we talk about, can we give some comparison? Can we talk about some differentiating policy guidance that someone at TASB received this and maybe they came to you and you said, well, wait a second, their interpretation is definitely far to the left, and here is within following the boundaries of the law, and here's the facts.
Something just jumped out at me. It's a little bit of a funny story. Let me tell you about one district I was working with earlier that honestly, that they were considering coming on with us. We're in the process of that. And they asked the same question. We want to see a comparison. And they sent me a TASB update, and they wanted to know what would T issue in this. So I read through it, consulted with our legal team, and I wrote back to this superintendent and trustees. First of all, we wouldn't have issued this, period, because it's not legally necessary. It was legally a several $1,000s charge for a document where we moved some clauses around in sentences that did not change any legal requirement, any intention, or anything that was even legally necessary. However, it was a revenue driver for the person that was...
Explain that. So they decided to, quote, bill the taxpayer, because this is what we're doing.
Correct.
To move around some clauses, no changes in policy, no legal changes, but they were just saying, here you go, and then here's your hundreds of dollars, here's your invoice for it.
Correct. You're absolutely correct.
Oh
And I
my.
kind of scratched my head. I thought, being 30 years in the business, I've seen these updates
Right.
forever, but I've never really dissected it like that. And I started looking. I'm literally just moving an anticipatory clause from the beginning of a sentence to the end. Like literally, it didn't even change the words. I'm striking a comma. Uh, I'm
No reason.
abbreviating some. I mean, I kept referring to our legal counsel. Am I missing something here that this is legally necessary? Are we
Mhm.
putting our districts at any kind of vulnerability by keeping the clause at the first of the sentence instead of at the end? Our answer was no. And so it was kind of funny to go back and say, we wouldn't have issued this to
Right.
begin with, and I would have saved you $3,800 because you wouldn't have paid that.
Oh my.
You know,
That's a lot of money for
it
districts.
is. And what we have seen when we were doing our just our due diligence informing our company and what does this business model really look like, I don't think school districts actually understand how much they pay in annual fees to TASB
Hmm.
because you are nickeled and dimed to death. It's very interesting to go do PIRs on invoices that are paid to TASB
Mm.
because, and I would encourage the local person to do that with their local school district.
Yeah.
Go look at, because it's not just one or two big invoices.
Mm-hmm.
It's like this slow trickle
Okay.
of funds.
$3,800, 30 for an
You know,
email.
You do that 30, 40
Oof.
times or across the course of the year, you've spent a significant amount of money. That, for one, let me say, it's never going to hit a procurement threshold, so it's not going to come in front of a board for approval. So this is all administratively handled
Oh
by
my.
central office staff. And I'm not even saying that they necessarily realize what's going on.
Right.
It's a slow trickle
Okay.
of financial inefficiency.
Wow. So if some of our viewers were going to go do a little digging in PIR, they could go and just say, I would like to see all invoices and payment receipts that have been sent to the Texas Association of
Mhm.
School Boards in insert the period of time.
Correct.
Okay.
Probably what you're going to find, it's what we found.
Uh-huh.
Very vague invoices.
Yes.
Very difficult to even decipher what
Yeah.
did my, as a taxpayer, what did my school district receive
Right.
for this amount of money?
Mm-hmm.
Lots of the terminology is consulting. Well, what
Oh,
do we
yes.
consult on? I mean there's
Yes.
no objective, there's
Right.
no, so that's what I would hypothesize they would see in their district. It's what we found.
Yeah, I think that that's great. We do this quite a bit and go into not just to districts, and you get very vague receipts, very little
Mhm.
description. But when you go into the PEMS data and
Absolutely.
try and start searching and figuring out lots of consulting,
Yes.
and you really are sitting there going, "What are we consulting here?
Mhm.
Like, what are you telling us?" And then, of course, lots and lots of legal fees. Those are usually the top line items that we're seeing. And yeah, so thank you for explaining for
Absolutely.
people out there that are really kind of curious as to how, to your point, that nickel and diming, it's kind of a death by a thousand cuts.
Very good comparison.
Yeah, when you're thinking about how budgets work and trustees in good faith are trying to figure this out. And let me ask, in that specific example,
Mhm.
had they asked for TASB to say move clauses around or
No.
anything? It was just done and then
No.
sent to them.
TASB has a mechanism in which they call, let me see what the terminology is. It's just a policy update, and the way it works, you just get a random, back in the old days, you get a random package in the mail. Now it comes electronically.
All right.
You have your cabinet peruse it.
And your bills and your invoice
Yeah,
for payments there.
Well, you do have to take it in front of your board, and they review it and adopt it, and it gets revised. I mean, but you did not, that request did not come
You didn't
from
order
you.
it.
That was not originated from you.
Right.
And I don't mind a policy update. Like our legal team is tracking with a couple of commissioners' rules right now
Sure.
to see how Commissioner Morath lands on those, so we'll know, hey, do we need to issue guidance on this or
Mhm.
not? It's not that I'm against policy updates. When
Right.
rules, when laws, when things change, of course we need to offer updated guidance and policy. But just to issue it when we, and our legal team even talked to going back to that original example about all these clauses moving. Really, if they felt that that's the way it read better or made the sentence stronger,
Mhm.
why didn't we save that and just package it with something that was actually legally required?
Sure.
Then we're billing the district once.
Right.
And
Right. Why are
and
we
it's why
wasting money, taxpayer money?
exactly.
That's right. And that's what this is about, right? When we talk about how much money is flowing out of the classroom. It's
Absolutely.
massive amounts. It's massive amounts of
Absolutely.
money, and it's going to a lot of these associations. When you look at the PEMS data, I mean, it's not just TASB. You're looking at TASA, which is owned, or a sister, that's the Texas Association of School Administrators. And
Yes,
then
ma'am.
you're looking at all these other public ed entities that are, quite frankly, like you said, just nickel and diming, or it's death by a thousand cuts. And
Right.
then your budget, and you're trying to figure out, what can I do to really support our teachers? Well, thank you for explaining that on the financial side and legal guidance. How about policy wise? One of the things, or the thing that we hear the most, is this leftist ideology that it was kind of the best analogy that I think of is the frog in the pot, right?
Right.
It started, a frog was thrown in the pot of water, and with each turn of the heat dial, or the progressive ideology dial,
Correct.
you don't realize it, and then suddenly you're boiling. You're
Right.
boiling with these culture wars that have permeated our schools, and that it's everywhere.
Hmm.
You're really seeing these problems. So let's talk about some of the policy guidance that takes that head on, which, quite frankly, is, I think, probably the impetus for a lot of these school districts that have said, no, we're not playing that game anymore. We're out.
Well, I think, and I've since being at T, I want to preface this with, that role of a trustee
Yeah.
has rapidly evolved since, let's say, the 1950s. I think back to even, 50s, 60s, 70s, probably even 80s. Trustees, they were meeting to approve basic, um, the reading, writing, math, science, social studies curriculums.
Mm-hmm.
They were paying bills.
Mm-hmm.
They were doing very business-minded things. And we get this mindset of, we're not partisan. We don't bring, we're here for the kids.
Right.
We're not, just those issues don't affect a school board.
No.
And I would 100% agree in that time period.
Yeah.
That's not the world we live in any
Right.
longer. Our trustees and our schools, quite frankly, are charged with being the societal incubator for so many issues that we believe are best governed by the parent.
Yes.
And not the school district.
That's right.
However, these organizations are inserting themselves into influencing the pathway that they see best fit. So that role of a trustee, I'm bringing this all together to say it's so critical who we have sitting in those trustee seats.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just picking out which Algebra 1 textbook we're using next year.
Right.
They're now deciding what is our approach towards sex ed.
Right.
What is our approach to what we're going to allow in libraries?
Yep.
What is our approach to gender fluidity? These are not the lighthearted issues of the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s.
Mm-hmm.
These are now value-based decisions. And what's codified into our law, our school board trustees are representative of the local values of their communities.
Mm-hmm.
And we should absolutely know what they stand for, what's their decision-making process, because we're going to get, for example, we're going to get policies from TASB that are going to include protected classes of people that are not protected by law,
Mm-hmm.
that are not protected by state law, that are not protected by federal law. However, somebody at TASB is scared they're going to get sued if we don't include these people.
Can you give an example?
And it's so fluid. So I don't
Sure.
want to, and I'll be the first to say I'm not an attorney. So
Yes.
hold me harmless on my.
That's
and
fair.
I will just say a lot of the gender fluid
Yes.
issues.
That's where I was getting at.
Quite
I've
honestly,
had trustees call me
yeah.
and say, "This is crazy. I don't even know what this means."
Well, and a lot of those things, they're not. And I'll say not yet. We don't know what the future holds. But at this point in time, they're not protected classes.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not required to be in Title IX policies.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to that discussion, it's not the law.
Right.
And if you want to do extreme risk management
Mm-hmm.
and go against the wills of the taxpayers and the voters and the values of your community, sure, include them. That's not what we believe at T. We believe that you are the elected official to a governing body of this state
Mm-hmm.
to represent the values and convictions of your community. And you should be fully informed of what is actually required, what's not, what's optional, and then make your decisions accordingly.
Yes. And a great example of that, one of your members is South Lake Carroll correct? And our viewers may know that they just won, I would say, a victory. It's an injunction on the Title IX requirements to let boys who are having a personality or gender identity crisis, but to say that they are allowed to go into the girls' locker rooms, participate in girls' sports. As a mother with 2 daughters and an athlete in my, K through 12 years, it's something that is horrifying to think about. But
Correct.
they had a huge victory because there was an injunction that they do not have to allow these policies. And that is what we're really talking about here, is that districts who represent the values of Texans,
Correct.
which is just common sense.
Absolutely.
Common sense values, which would be, of course, boys should not be in the girls' locker rooms. But they stood up. Not only did they take the heat when they said, we're going to leave TASB and the lawsuits were threatened, but they also stood up and said, we're not jumping into these culture wars that you, the federal government, are trying to force into our community.
Absolutely. And South Lake, many of our other boards that we're so blessed to work with, they truly understand their role as a governing body.
Yep.
We're not here for the government to do things to us. We're here to govern.
That's right.
And I love that mindset that they understand their role. And that's, and I didn't mention this earlier, that's such a huge piece of a policy organization is training.
Yeah.
Really empowering the trustees that they understand their absolute role. TASB would have you believe that school board trustees have 2 functions: to hire the superintendent and approve the budget.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely not true.
Right.
There are pages of code codified in Texas code today of what the responsibilities of a school board trustee are. And if they fully understand those, they take the bold action like the South Lake Carroll board did.
Mm-hmm.
They're not scared to stand up to the federal government and say, not in our school district.
Mm-hmm.
We don't do that here.
I love it.
And that's really where we want to get to. And we're not, and the thing about that is Texas is such a varied state, and although we have so many core values that are very similar amongst the vast majority of Texans, that policy may look a little bit different in South Lake than it does in, some other district.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay, as long as they're being represented by those trustees. There might be a slight nuance. They may approach something just a little bit different.
Sure.
Fine. That's how the system should work. They're the elected official.
Oh, yes. And I love that you reiterate that. It's interesting because I just recently had a public school board trustee who said essentially the same thing. He had gone to the recent TASB conference, or Leadership Institute, I think is what they called it, for their June meeting. And he just straight up said, they treat us like we don't know anything.
Correct.
And that you must do exactly what we say. But the reality is that our trustees are elected officials by their communities who
Correct.
have said, we're here to be in charge. The superintendent answers to us. We're here with the interests of our community,
Right.
not necessarily what specifically TASB or some of these other massive pseudo-government entities, at least paid completely by tax dollars,
Absolutely.
are saying.
Well, what's crazy, and I'm sure this has crossed your path as well. It's a school board association. Do you know who can't call TASB for support? School board trustees.
Wait, what?
It's so crazy. And I have several friends. I've tested this theory in many districts, not just ones that I'm most familiar with, but many districts across the state.
Uh-huh.
Hey, do me a favor. I want you to call TASB and just say, hey, I want some assistance in understanding our recent XYZ product we got from you. Well, sir, we don't deal directly with trustees. You will need to have your superintendent call in on your behalf and to receive this service.
Oh my.
And
really?
That is a dramatic difference between T and TASB.
But the trustees are in charge. That is like in a business. Let's go with a business. That is the board of directors. That's
Absolutely.
who you answer to.
Absolutely. And we forget sometimes that this is the governing body.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to diminish the role of cabinet level staff or superintendents. They serve very vital roles, but they are employees of the district.
Correct.
And we have to remember that these are employees. these are the governing body.
Yes.
And we honestly, in a lot of contexts, have it flipped.
Right.
We have it flipped.
Yes. And it's interesting when we talk about that. Look, there are some excellent leaders, school leaders out there. When we
Absolutely.
talk about kind of particularly the budgets and how this role reversal has been indoctrinated, quite frankly, into
Absolutely.
so many of our trustees, this idea that somehow they serve at the pleasure of the superintendent versus the truth, which is that the superintendent is hired. And I think, I've heard stories about this recruitment process and quite frankly, the compensation demanded
Mhm.
that is demanded by the search committees
Mhm.
that are oftentimes a part of TASB or tied directly to them. But these search committees that are going and finding these superintendents, I can't help but think it's similar to, recruiting football coaches
Yes.
or basketball coaches.
Mhm.
We're giving them these massive, massive contracts. We're talking $500,000 plus housing, plus cars,
Right.
plus stipends and so. And you're just thinking, how did this happen? And the trustees, from my experience, are oftentimes surprised at kind of how this whole thing happened. And well, that's the options that we got.
Right. Well, and I always I've spent some time in school finance. I've been a chief financial officer. I've done, I've built templates. I've implemented those at the district level, and I think this is also a mindset shift. First and foremost, let's flip the pyramid.
Mhm.
What are we thinking about teacher compensation first
Right.
before we're talking about recruitment of these upper level people that they serve important roles? That's fine. But what are we doing about those teachers that are on the front lines every day with a more and more challenging audience of
Yes.
students because of the baggage that they do bring in
Mhm.
from the worlds in which they have to live in, quite honestly. And what are we doing there first and foremost?
Yeah.
And then build up from there. But the compensation issue in Texas right now, it is, and I'll be the first to say I want to pay teachers as much as we can possibly afford.
Yes.
And that's a hard statement to say because I've been a teacher. My wife was a teacher at one point. I understand. I've been in this business a long time. They are our front lines.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, there is only so much money that we have to work with.
Mm.
And I want to pay teachers as much as we can afford. And I think that's where people get off kilter.
Yeah.
It's not a blank check to say, oh, you just get whatever you want. Now, I
But
think
we can certainly give more to them. This takes me back
Absolutely.
to the superintendent of Huffman ISD. I think his name is Benny Salo,
Mhm.
something along those lines. And, his own teachers in a staff meeting filmed him as he was engaging or potentially or allegedly engaging in electioneering. I think that's still being reviewed from the AG's office, at
Sure.
least from last I saw. But, his own teachers turned it in and they specifically asked him when he was kind of saying, you have to vote for these 16 people because and da-da-da-da and pushing them. And someone said, is that your way of telling us we're not going to get pay raises? And he went in this whole thing and effectively it was yes. Because, right, they had declined the $4,000 pay raises
Sure.
to prevent empowering parents with the ability to select their schools. And I sat and I listened to it. And the first thing that came through my mind was, how dare you how dare you engage in this activity? But also, I cannot imagine being in that position. And I think that gentleman was making $200,000-$300,000 a year.
Sure.
And saying that to teachers and not being like, and I took one, I'm with you. I'm
Absolutely.
giving this much, or I'm doing this, or I didn't take a pay raise. No, not one of them. I've not heard of one superintendent that said, you didn't get a pay raise, I'm not getting a pay raise. And it's really this weird mentality because, like you said, our teachers are the front line. And so many legislators, Representative Brian Harrison had put forth an amendment on House Bill 100
Mhm.
to say half of this, at that point, I think it was $4 billion
Sure.
that was in the regular session, half of this must go to our teachers.
Right. Yeah.
All of those that are against empowering parents are the same people that are against empowering teachers with pay raises.
Absolutely. And their job is tougher now than it has ever been.
Yeah.
So don't hear me say that I don't want our teachers to be paid every penny that we can afford to give them. We do absolutely need to do that. When And it had been a year or two since I'd really been out of the school finance world.
Yeah.
So when I was really studying this, I dove in, because we're starting to hear more and more districts talk about deficit budgets and we can't afford, and there's no teacher pay raises, and we're having to withdraw out of our fund balance and savings accounts just to make payroll. And I'm like, what on earth is going on? And it's very interesting because these are all readily available audit reports.
That's
Anybody
right.
can grab them off the TEA website and look at very common data. Very common school districts with similar tax bases, with similar industry, with similar student counts. Let's just be frank. Some can balance their budget and others can't. I don't think that's a state level problem.
Yeah.
That's a local problem. That's not living within the means that has been provided to you. Again, don't hear me say that I don't want
No,
the
we need to be.
state to kick in more and
Let's
to
go
do
back
what
to
we
how
can.
these nickel and diming. I'm
But,
really going to
yeah.
is that we're steering so much money away from the teachers in the classroom. That's right.
And
why are we paying for? Look, you're paying your fees for TASB. Why are you paying for TASA and the Public School Coalition and the mid-size and I mean it's a whole. I've heard several legislators refer to them as the alphabet soup crew because they are just steering. It's money. It's tax dollars.
that's right.
Out away from being able to put them into our teacher pay raises. So I'm with you. We're saying the same thing.
A huge contrast between T and other organizations. We are standing up school finance services.
That's great.
However, ours, we're not out saying that we need to finance short-term items in a 30-year bond. And we're not, we have school districts that are literally tearing down buildings they haven't even paid off yet
I know.
from past bonds. Instead, we're providing services and trustee support. That's a critical difference. We're empowering our trustees. What questions do you ask about this budget? What are the risk factors?
Yep.
Are your revenues keeping pace with what your expenditures are? What's your tax collection rate at this point? And man, the light bulbs that start coming on when trustees start understanding the true mechanics. We're not voting for blanket, 5% increases on this and 3% increases on that. We're going, wait a minute, do we have the revenue to support that decision? It's going to be very interesting over the next, I'm going to say 2 to 3 years. I am familiar just off of my limited knowledge of at least a dozen school districts who will be cash insolvent, meaning they will not have the cash on hand to make their payroll, to pay their bills in the next 18 to 24 months because they're spending deficit. They're spending out of their savings account. And in the school business, so much of finance is about cash management. You don't get regular deposits from the state. You don't get, your grants don't send you a monthly stipend. So much of it's on a reimbursement process or, your state payments from Texas. You start school in August, you may not get your first payment from them in state aid till, November, December, January. So you're having to exist for 3 and 4 months and make your, $3 million payroll on the cash you have on hand.
Yeah.
When you live in deficit land and you've spent all your cash, guess what? You can't make payroll.
Yeah.
You can't pay your bills.
Yeah.
This is a runaway train if trustees don't realize that and really start governing. And this is one of their number one responsibilities as a trustee is to ensure the efficiency of the taxpayer funds and the fiduciary responsibility to make sure they're being spent wisely. We are in for a crash course for those districts that keep their heads in the sand and keep spending without common sense logic.
Yep. I think that's wonderful that T is trying to really empower trustees to have that financial understanding of what the situation is and how you can truly utilize taxpayer dollars to provide the very best education possible. So that is phenomenal. Is there anything else that you want to share with our viewers about what TEE does or why you are different and your value-added proposition as to what maybe their school districts are receiving right now?
I think at the root of T and all of our services, and at the end of the day, a lot of these are just services, that you provide that people need. But we try to stay focused on really changing the mindset. Yes, I could do a a compensation study for you and just produce a document and say, hey, here's what the market says you should produce. However, let's train you on that. Let's talk about the mindset of this. What are other ways that you can compensate teachers without just pay? Let's talk about innovative, initiatives that are out there. Let's talk about, what untangible benefits are we providing teachers? That's a mindset shift.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, and I think most teachers will tell you this, their number one motivator in the world is not compensation.
Right.
Let's
That's all the teachers that I talk to.
let's tap into that.
Yep. They want control of their classrooms. They want to be able to teach. They want to know that
Absolutely.
admin backs them up with disciplinary measures.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Let's not ignore those things
Yep.
that would be huge value adds.
Yep.
So I really want to lay that as a foundation that makes us different.
Yep.
Is we're interested in changing mindset, in building strong foundations for all of these services, but because that's really where you make the change.
Yep.
If not, we're just going to be a one-hit wonder, and whenever the next shiny bullet comes through, they'll change to something else.
Yeah.
We want long-lasting, policy-driven, ideological change that will really take our school districts to a much more fiscally responsible, values-based approach as they make decisions.
I love that. So before we wrap up, the parent empowerment movement that has swept the state, which includes empowering teachers, empowering great trustees, empowering taxpayers to really have an understanding of what's going on in the classrooms, particularly on the financial side of things, and particularly with their value alignment. Can you look in that camera and talk to Texans, talk to the parents and the patriots and the trustees, and tell them what you want them to know about how they can take power back and really recharge their own community and school district with what T is offering?
Absolutely. At Texans for Excellence in Education, we believe that at the heart of every decision should be the student. First and foremost, education is not about the adults. Education is about the kids. And we want you to know that you do have choices. Your children are your most precious commodity, and you do not have to accept the status quo for them. We're so thankful for the framework that our prior legislators have handed us that empower parents, that have codified into law that Texas values reign supreme in our state. You do not have to accept the status quo. There are choices. There are options. However, unless you inquire of those, unless you get to the voting polls and elect the trustees that are going to represent you the best in that trustee seat, change doesn't happen. School is definitely a scenario in which grassroots make a difference. When parents get fed up with the status quo, when parents get fed up with values and programs and things that do not align with what they're trying to teach in their home, when that happens, change starts happening. And I would encourage you to do that. Be proactive. Engage in the process. That's when you'll see change happen. And we at T, we see our niche in this reform is we want to support those trustees that are ready to take that journey, that are ready to be empowered governing bodies of their school districts. We want to empower them with the services, with the training, and with the policies they need to represent their communities the best way they can.
Thank you, John. This has been amazing. I think everything that T is doing aligns with the parent empowerment mission, which is transparency, quality, respect, and choice. I'm so glad
Absolutely.
that Texans for Excellence in Education is another choice for our trustees to make to empower parents, empower teachers, and give better options to our communities. Thank you for joining us at Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. And now you have the power.